15 years ago, Ethan Carter, a white billionaire in the fashion industry, cast his black wife, Amara, out onto the streets with nothing, deeming her unworthy of him. But now, on the Paris fashion runway, Amara, a radiant and successful businesswoman, strides confidently alongside her new family. From the shadowy corners of the audience, Ethan can only watch alone and filled with regret as he faces the consequences of his own arrogance. Are you curious about Amara's journey from heartbreak to triumph? Or do you wonder if Ethan will find redemption? Stay tuned to uncover this deeply emotional story. Ethan Carter was the epitome of a self-made millionaire. At 38, he owned Carter Luxe, a luxury fashion brand adored by celebrities and the elite. With his refined style and confident demeanor, Ethan was the very symbol of power and success. Beside him stood Amara Johnson Carter, his elegant and captivating black wife. To the public, they were the perfect power couple of high society. But behind the glass doors of their opulent Manhattan penthouse lay a far different reality. Amara had once been a promising designer, brimming with ambition at the start of her career. She met Ethan during the early days of Carter Luxe, when he was building it from the ground up. Their love was simple and genuine then. Ethan, with his charm and towering ambitions, made Amara believe they could create something extraordinary together. She set aside her own dreams to support his, standing by him through the leanest of times. In the early days, Carter Luxe bore the marks of Amara's creativity and vision. Her hands and mind were woven into its first designs, though her name never appeared in the credits. Ethan, with his business acumen and magnetic charisma, quickly became the sole face of the brand. Over time, the distance between them grew wider. Ethan became increasingly consumed by his work and the allure of success. He stopped seeing Amara as his partner in life and instead saw her as an accessory to the perfect image he wanted the world to see. To Ethan, Amara was no longer a wife, she was a status symbol. Nights in the penthouse passed in heavy silence. Ethan came home late, exhausted, and barely spoke to her. Amara's attempts to bridge the growing gap between them were met with indifference and cold detachment. One evening, at a glamorous fashion industry gala, Amara chose to wear a dress she had designed herself. It was a striking piece, modern yet deeply rooted in cultural significance, a statement of her enduring talent. But instead of pride, Ethan offered a cutting remark in front of their high-profile guests.
"You should leave the designing to the professional. This dress, it's a bit too streets for our image."
Amara froze, his words landing like a slap. It wasn't just an offhand comment, it was a blatant display of his disregard for her. The humiliation was unbearable, amplified by the judgmental glances and faint pity in the eyes of their onlookers. That night, back in the penthouse, Amara stood before their wedding photo hanging on the living room wall. In it, Ethan held her hand with a radiant smile, a version of him that now felt like a distant memory. She touched the frame, silently asking herself what she had sacrificed to build the life she was now living. She was no longer the idealistic young woman full of dreams and resolve. She had become a wife unappreciated, a woman erased in her own story. Under the dim glow of the penthouse lights, Amara whispered a question she had never dared to confront before.
"Did I give up everything for this man?"
That evening, the atmosphere at the Carter Luxe Charity Gala was a dazzling spectacle of elegance and sophistication. Every guest sang praises of the event. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand hall in light, their brilliance mirrored in the polished surfaces of designer gowns and clinking wine glasses. Laughter and the tinkling of glasses blended seamlessly with the soft strains of piano music, creating a scene that begged to be immortalized. Amara Johnson Carter had meticulously planned this evening for months. Every detail, from the exquisite menu crafted by a Michelin-starred chef to the imported Dutch flowers arranged in harmonious clusters, bore her personal touch. This was not just the annual fundraising event for Carter Luxe, it was an opportunity for Amara to reaffirm her worth not just as Ethan Carter's wife, but as an independent, capable woman in her own right. She felt proud of what she had accomplished, but that pride was quickly eclipsed by Ethan's cold indifference throughout the evening. Amara stood in the crowded room, smiling professionally as she welcomed each guest. But her heart searched for something more, a familiar gaze from Ethan. He was only a few steps away, surrounded by wealthy and influential people, the ones he always seemed to value more than any personal connection. Ethan, dressed in a flawlessly tailored suit, still exuded the same magnetic charm that had captivated her when they first met. But his gaze no longer lingered on her. All evening, his attention was devoted solely to the major donors, those who could help Carter Lux expand its global reach. Amara approached him quietly, placing a gentle hand on his arm just as he finished a conversation. Amara.
Would you like something to drink? I can ask the server to bring it over.
Ethan glanced at her briefly, his expression tinged with irritation. Ethan.
That won't be necessary. I can manage.
She withdrew her hand, forcing a smile before retreating toward the service counter. The unease she had felt all night solidified into a sinking certainty. The man she had fallen in love with, the man she had stood beside through thick and thin, was now a stranger. Conversations with other guests, which she once found engaging, now felt like hollow noise. As the night wore on, Amara felt like a shadow in the room, ever present, yet unnoticed. When the event finally ended, Ethan remained engrossed in a lively discussion with the key sponsors. Not wanting to interrupt, Amara decided to leave early without informing him. The car sped through Manhattan's illuminated streets. She gazed out the window, the reflection of streetlights flickering across the glass mirroring the emptiness she felt inside. Her thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of her phone. She opened the message, reading the brief yet gut-wrenching words from a close friend in the fashion industry.
Ethan seemed quite intimate with his assistant tonight. I hope I'm mistaken.
Amara stared at the screen, her hands trembling slightly. She quickly deleted the message, trying to reassure herself that it must have been a misunderstanding. Ethan could be distant, even callous, but he wasn't the type to betray her. She clung to that belief, if only to salvage the fragile remnants of her faith in him. Entering the penthouse, she was greeted by an unsettling silence. The absence of noise amplified the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor. The living room lights were off, and the space felt emptier than ever. Amara set her purse down on the sofa, slipped off her heels, and walked slowly toward the bedroom. Her heartbeat quickened when she noticed the faint glow of light streaming through the partially open door. Muffled laughter and intimate whispers floated through the gap. She froze. The unease in her chest morphed into dread. Pushing the door open, Amara stepped inside. The creak of the door sounded louder than it should have, as if heralding the moment that would forever change her life. Light spilled into the room, illuminating her stunned face. She stood there, paralyzed by the sight before her. Ethan Carter, the man she had loved, trusted, and sacrificed everything for, was entangled with a young woman on the bed they had once shared in happier times. The woman, clad in a flimsy silk nightgown, scrambled to sit up, her expression a mixture of panic and guilt. Ethan, on the other hand, showed no signs of surprise. He didn't flinch or falter. Instead, he looked at Amara with the detached gaze of someone inconvenienced by an unexpected interruption. Amara, her voice trembling.
Ethan, what is this?
Ethan rose calmly, adjusting the collar of his shirt as though nothing was amiss. His eyes, devoid of remorse, locked onto hers with an air of irritation. Ethan coolly.
You weren't supposed to come home so early. Are you planning to make a scene? This isn't a big deal.
The other woman, her voice laced with mockery, chimed in.
This bed? Oh, honey, it hasn't been yours for a while. Look at you, old, washed up. No wonder he needs a real woman.
Amara turned sharply, her eyes blazing with fury. Amara, shouting.
Who do you think you are to talk to me like that? Don't you feel ashamed for destroying a family?
She strode toward the other woman, her hand raised, ready to slap her across the face. But before her hand could land, Ethan lunged forward, grabbing her wrist and yanking her back forcefully. Ethan, his voice sharp.
Amara, stop this nonsense. Don't make things worse than they already are.
Amara wrenched her arm free from his grip, tears beginning to stream down her face. Amara, her voice breaking.
Worse? Ethan, you're betraying me in our own home, in our own bed. And I'm the one making things worse?
Ethan laughed a cold, hollow sound that sent a chill down her spine. He released her, his eyes devoid of love, brimming with disdain. Ethan.
Amara, look at yourself. Do you really think I need you? Look at the way you've let yourself go, pathetic, outdated, clinging desperately to some semblance of value. You're no longer the woman I need.
Amara stared at him in disbelief, too stunned to speak. But before she could respond, the younger woman interjected, her voice sweet yet venomous mistress.
Honestly, Ethan deserves a real woman. Someone who doesn't cling to the past and wallow in self-pity. Maybe you should have realized it a long time ago, darling.
Amara turned sharply, her fury reignited, and took another step toward the woman. Amara yelling.
What do you know about me? You're nothing but a cheap homewrecker?
Ethan moved swiftly, this time not just blocking her path but shoving her backward with force. Ethan.
Enough, Amara. She's not the problem. You are. You have nothing left to keep me here. Stop playing the victim.
Amara stumbled, falling hard onto the cold floor. Pain radiated through her body, but it was nothing compared to the searing humiliation in her heart. Ethan walked over to his desk, pulled out a stack of papers, and threw them down in front of her. Ethan.
Sign it. These are the divorce papers. You mean nothing to me anymore? I've had this ready for a long time. Do the right thing and leave?
Amara stared at the papers, her vision blurred by tears. She skimmed the first page and froze when she read the words.
Forfeiture of all financial rights.
The text screamed at her, a cruel confirmation that Ethan not only wanted to end their relationship but intended to leave her with nothing. Amara, her voice trembling but resolute.
How long, Ethan? How long have you been planning this? While I was here trying to save this marriage.
Ethan laughed again, a mirthless, contemptuous sound. Ethan.
Save it? Amara, do you honestly think you ever had the power to save me or this marriage? You're nothing without me. Everything you have is because of me. This house, your so-called reputation, the designer dresses you parade around in, they all exist because of me. Without me, you're nothing.
Amara looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of agony and rage. But the weight of his betrayal crushed her words before they could form. She no longer had the strength to fight back. Amara placed the pen on the desk, her hands trembling. She stared at the divorce papers before her, the signatures on them a stark verdict, severing the last thread that tied her to Ethan, the man she had once devoted her youth and dreams to loving. The room was oppressively silent. Ethan, leaning against the desk, said nothing. He simply picked up the stack of papers, flipping through each page with deliberate care. The sound of the shuffling pages echoed like hammer blows against Amara's dignity. Once satisfied that everything was in order, Ethan casually set the papers aside and straightened up. Without sparing her a glance, he turned away, his voice cold and distant. Ethan.
Pack your things and leave by morning. I don't want to see you here another second.
His words weren't just a dismissal, they were a final declaration that she no longer belonged, that she held no value in his life. The young woman on the bed, still lounging comfortably, allowed a mocking smile to play across her lips. Her crimson lips curled as she gazed at Amara with feigned pity. Mistress.
Goodbye, darling. Best of luck. With your age and taste in fashion, you're going to need it.
Amara didn't reply. She wanted to scream, to hurl something back at the cruel taunts, but her lips quivered, refusing to form the words. Slowly, she rose, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. Ethan cast her a final, fleeting glance. There was no trace of love or regret in his eyes. Then, as if she no longer existed, he turned back to the younger woman, offering her his hand like a gallant gentleman, helping her rise with the same tenderness he had once shown Amara. Ethan.
Come on, let's leave her to sort herself out.
Amara felt her heart shatter anew as she watched Ethan's gentleness toward another woman. Turning away, she forced herself to walk out of the room without looking back. In the walk-in closet, Amara paused, surveying the space that had once been her sanctuary. Here, she had spent countless hours selecting outfits for events with Ethan, believing she was part of something meaningful. Now, everything felt hollow, the remnants of a life she no longer recognized. She pulled out an old suitcase and methodically began packing a few simple clothes, the only things she thought she might need. The luxurious gowns and expensive shoes Ethan had given her were left untouched, now nothing more than painful reminders of what she had lost. Dragging her suitcase down the grand hallway for the last time, Amara took in the penthouse she had once thought would be their home. Now, it was nothing but a gilded cage that had imprisoned her dreams and youth. At the door, she paused, her trembling hands resting on her abdomen. In that moment, she felt it a small but unmistakable life growing within her. A secret Ethan would never know. Amara to herself.
You'll never endure what I did. You'll have a better life, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you.
Her resolve hardened as she gripped the handle of her suitcase and stepped into the cold Manhattan night. Standing by the curb, the neon lights of towering skyscrapers illuminated her tired face. A taxi pulled up, and the driver looked at her curiously. Ivor.
Where to?
Amara caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, puffy eyes, a face swollen from tears. But behind the weariness, there was a flicker of determination she hadn't seen before. Amara.
Atlanta?
The driver raised an eyebrow at the unexpected destination but didn't press further. The taxi pulled away, leaving behind the glittering skyline of Manhattan, carrying a woman who had fallen but was determined to rise again. Throughout the long journey, Amara sat in silence, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Mile after mile, she whispered silently to herself, Amara to herself.
This isn't the end. This is the beginning. I promise I'll live better for you.
The dazzling city lights faded into the distance, replaced by quiet, empty roads. Yet within her, a small flame of hope began to burn brighter. Atlanta greeted Amara with a chilly dawn. The taxi came to a stop on a small street in Sweet Auburn, the neighborhood she had called home before leaving with Ethan. The quaint shops, weathered walls, and tree-lined paths brought a flood of memories rushing back. She stepped out of the car, dragging her battered suitcase behind her, and inhaled deeply. Sweet Auburn wasn't an easy place to live, but it was the only place she could begin again. Amara dragged her worn suitcase along the cobblestone streets of Sweet Auburn, Atlanta, her heart heavy with a mixture of familiarity and estrangement. The city greeted her with a gray, overcast morning, the dreary sky mirroring the storm within her. A biting wind seeped through her fingers, sending a shiver down her spine. Sweet Auburn had been her childhood home, a place where every corner held memories of laughter and dreams. But now, it was the starting point of a new life, not with the eager anticipation of a young, ambitious girl, but with the quiet resilience of a broken woman. At the end of the street stood her mother's small wooden house, tucked beneath the shade of an old oak tree. The white picket fence, peeling with age, was exactly as it had been when she left. As Amara stood at the door, her hands trembled not from the cold, but from fear. Fear of admitting to her mother that she had failed, that the marriage she had fought so hard to protect was now in ruins. But that fear couldn't overpower her yearning for the warmth of her mother's embrace, the solace of kind words, even if just for a moment. When the door opened, Louise looked at Amara with a mix of surprise and concern. Without waiting for her mother to speak, Amara threw herself into her arms, tears cascading down her face like a waterfall. Amara, sobbing.
I have nowhere else to go, Mom.
Louise held her tightly, gently patting her back without saying a word. She understood that some wounds didn't need explanations, at least not right away. In the familiar, modest kitchen, Amara sat across from her mother, watching her calloused hands fold a pile of towels. The years of hard work etched themselves clearly in Louise's lined face, but her gaze was steady and strong. Louise, her tone firm yet gentle.
You're not the first to fail, Amara. What matters is not letting that failure define the rest of your life.
Her words pierced the darkness clouding Amara's heart. She knew she had to rise not just for herself, but for the child growing within her. The next day, Amara set out to find work. She knocked on the doors of small shops around the neighborhood, from bakeries to barber shops, but none were hiring. Each polite shake of the head from a manager, paired with a sympathetic look, chipped away at her confidence. By the afternoon, as the sunlight began to wane, Amara spotted a
Help wanted
sign taped to the window of a small garment workshop. The words "assistant needed, no experience required" filled her with a flicker of hope. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside and knocked on the door. The workshop was tucked inside an old building, its fluorescent lights casting a dull glow over the concrete floors. The air was filled with the whirring of sewing machines, the sharp snip of scissors, and the rustling of fabric. Amara was assigned the simplest tasks, inspecting fabric for defects and cutting pieces according to templates. Every morning she stood for hours at the cutting table, her hands aching and her fingers often pricked by sharp needles. By the afternoon she moved to inspecting seams, her eyes straining from staring at tiny threads. Each evening her body ached to collapse, but Amara refused to complain. The other workers, mostly middle-aged women, didn't speak much to her. Their glances carried both sympathy and judgment, making Amara feel like she was constantly being measured and found wanting. One day during a lunch break, as Amara fumbled with her scissors, one of the workers made a snide remark, worker smirking.
I guess someone who's used to living in luxury doesn't know how to hold scissors properly.
Amara looked up, her tired but determined smile disarming the insult. Amara.
Give me time. I'll learn faster than you think.
The ridicule faded as Amara proved herself. Though her body was sore after each grueling day, she showed up every morning with quiet determination. Each night, Amara returned to her mother's small home, sitting at the worn kitchen table with a notebook in hand. She sketched designs inspired by the scraps of fabric she saw at the workshop. These weren't extravagant or avant-garde concepts, but simple ideas born from her imagination and her circumstances. One evening, as she sorted through her things, she pulled out an old sketch of dress design she had drawn back in New York, a dream that had never been realized. Her heart grew heavy with memories of the dreams she'd once held so dearly. Amara to herself.
Is it all over? Is this dream gone forever?
Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where she felt the faint but resolute presence of new life. Amara to herself.
I can't give up, my love. We'll get through this together.
The job at the workshop wasn't just physically demanding, it tested her spirit. Some of the workers' glances remained skeptical, though the overt mockery had ceased. One afternoon, after fumbling with a stubborn piece of fabric, Amara overheard another biting comment, worker, with a chuckle.
She might look like she belongs in a penthouse, but she's learning she's no queen here.
Amara straightened, meeting the worker's gaze with a calm but fierce resolve. Amara.
Keep watching. I'll prove that I belong anywhere I choose to be.
With each passing day, she silenced the skeptics not with words, but with persistence. In the quiet of her mother's home, Amara poured her exhaustion into creativity. She sketched late into the night, turning the day's frustrations into fresh designs. Slowly, she felt a faint spark of hope rekindling within her. The child in her womb became her anchor and her muse, inspiring her to dream again. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something new. Amara knew the road ahead would be long and hard, But with each sketch and each small victory, she began to see the faint outlines of a brighter future. A soft autumn afternoon light filtered through the windows of the sewing workshop, casting faint beams across the cutting tables and scattered spools of thread. Amara sat in the quietest corner of the room, away from the bustle. In front of her lay an old sketch pad, its pages worn and smudged with time but still brimming with the meticulous detail and passion they once held. She flipped through the pages, and memories of her dream of becoming a fashion designer came rushing back. That dream now felt like a faint glimmer in a dark room. Though she wasn't sure she had the strength to pursue it again, something deep within her refused to let go entirely. Amara to herself.
Maybe all I need is a reason, just one chance to start over.
Her thoughts were interrupted by a warm voice that broke the stillness. Isaac.
These sketches, are they yours?
Startled, Amara looked up. Standing before her was a young man with chiseled features and bright, intelligent eyes radiating energy and kindness. In his hand, he held one of her sketches, his gaze studying it with keen interest. Amara hesitant.
Yes, they're mine. Just a few old ideas. I used to dream of being a designer.
Isaac sat down across from her, carefully placing the sketch on the table. His smile was reassuring, bringing an unexpected sense of warmth. Isaac.
Old ideas? I think these are pretty remarkable. Did you study design somewhere?
Amara a bit embarrassed.
I did, but life didn't quite go the way I planned.
Isaac paused for a moment, his gaze never leaving her. He seemed to see more than just talent in her work. He saw a quiet fire struggling to survive beneath the ashes. Isaac.
I'm Isaac Thompson. I'm a fashion designer, and I run a small studio downtown. If you're interested, I think we could work together.
Amara stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. Amara uncertain.
You don't even know me. Why would you want to help me?
Isaac genuinely.
Because I used to be you. I know what it feels like to have your dreams left behind, and I don't want to see someone else go through that if I can help.
He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table before standing up to leave. Isaac.
You don't have to decide now, but if you're ready, come to my studio.
3 days later, Amara stood in front of the address printed on the card. Isaac's studio was nestled in a quaint neighborhood, surrounded by aging storefronts. As she stepped inside, the space opened up into a haven of creativity. Natural light flooded the room, worktables overflowed with fabric and unfinished designs, and the walls displayed framed photographs of Isaac's past collections. Isaac emerged from behind a desk, holding a roll of fabric. When he saw Amara, his face lit up with a wide smile. Isaac.
I was starting to think you wouldn't come. I'm glad you did.
Amara stood in the middle of the room, her eyes taking in every detail. The energy here was palpable, a place where ideas were allowed to soar without boundaries. Amara awed.
This place, it's incredible.
Isaac.
And I think you'll help make it even better.
Isaac gave her a tour, explaining his ongoing projects and how he ran the studio. It was a small operation, but every detail reflected passion and heart. Isaac wasn't just a talented designer, he was an inspiring leader. Amara began working at Isaac's studio as an assistant. Her first tasks were straightforward, refining sketches and experimenting with cutting fabric for new designs. She fumbled at first, her hands unsteady and unfamiliar with the tools. But Isaac was patient, guiding her through every step. Isaac encouraging.
Don't worry, everyone needs time to find their rhythm. You're improving every day. I can see it.
Isaac's support extended beyond work. One evening, noticing Amara staying late, he brought her a sandwich and set it on her table. Isaac.
You need to eat before you exhaust yourself. I don't want my first employee passing out on me.
Amara looked at him, her eyes glistening with unspoken gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone genuinely cared about her well-being. When Isaac learned she was pregnant, he didn't flinch or offer pity. Instead, he doubled down on his encouragement.
Isaac, pregnancy isn't a weakness, Amara. It's a reason to be even stronger. And I'll do everything I can to support you.
As Amara settled into her role, she began to rediscover her passion. Late nights at the studio often found her sketching designs, drawing inspiration from her experiences and the leftover scraps of fabric around her. Isaac became more than a mentor, he became a confidant and a true friend. One evening, after completing her first original design in years, Amara sat back in her chair, smiling at her work. Isaac walked over, setting a cup of tea on the table beside her. Isaac,
you did an amazing job, Amara. I always knew you could.
Amara smiling, her voice trembling with emotion.
Thank you, Isaac. You don't know how much you've helped me.
Isaac said nothing, simply sitting beside her. In that quiet moment, Amara felt a weight lift. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, she believed in herself again. Isaac's studio wasn't just a workplace, it was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Over time, Isaac's small studio became more than just a workplace for Amara. It became a sanctuary where she felt safe to be herself. Every morning, Isaac greeted her with a warm smile, always asking if she'd slept well and reminding her not to skip breakfast. Those small gestures of care slowly began to melt the hardened shell Amara had built around herself after all the pain she'd endured. One day, as Amara was carefully cutting fabric for a new design, her hand slipped, slicing through an expensive piece of silk. She froze, her hands trembling as panic filled her eyes. Amara.
Isaac, I ruined it. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for it.
Isaac walked over, gently taking the damaged fabric from her hands. Shaking his head, he smiled reassuringly. Isaac.
Don't worry, Amara. It's just a piece of fabric, not a failure. But if it feels important to you, why not create something new from it? I believe you'll make it even better.
His calm demeanor and unwavering faith in her made Amara feel something she hadn't in a long time. She wasn't being judged. Isaac wasn't just a mentor at work, he was teaching her how to forgive herself, something she had never truly learned to do. One late evening, after completing an important design, the two of them sat at the large work table in the studio. The warm glow of a desk lamp softened the tension of the long day. Isaac poured 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of Amara, his gaze filled with quiet curiosity. Isaac, gently.
Amara, can I ask you something? I feel like you carry a deep sadness, but you've never spoken about it. I won't pressure you, but if you ever want to share, I'm here to listen.
Amara looked at him, her hands gripping the warm cup to hide their trembling. She had kept her story locked away, not out of fear of judgment, but because she never thought anyone could understand. Yet something about Isaac's sincerity made her feel like she could trust him. Amara.
I once had everything, or at least I thought I did. A successful husband, a life everyone envied. But then I realized it was all an illusion. He betrayed me. He threw me out when I had nothing left. I walked away with nothing but one thing he didn't know. I was pregnant.
Isaac stayed silent, his eyes filled with empathy. He didn't interrupt, giving Amara the space to continue. Amara, her voice breaking.
I don't want this child to grow up in the shadow of a father like him. But some days, I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this alone.
Isaac placed his hand gently over hers, his gaze steady and filled with resolve. Isaac.
Amara, you're not alone. I don't know everything you've been through, but I do know this. You're the strongest person I've ever met. If you need a friend, someone to stand by you, I'm...
After that evening, the relationship between Amara and Isaac began to change. Late nights at the studio weren't just about sewing and sketches anymore, they became moments where they shared pieces of their lives. Isaac would often bring her tea, prepare light meals when she forgot to eat, or simply sit beside her in companionable silence. One evening, while reviewing a new design, Amara accidentally fell asleep at her work table. Isaac glanced over at her tired but peaceful face, and a gentle warmth filled his chest. Quietly, he reached for a shawl draped over a chair and placed it over her shoulders to keep her warm. The next morning, Amara woke to find the shawl around her and a cup of tea still warm on the table. She smiled softly, her heart touched in a way she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of peace. One afternoon, as they strolled through the streets near the studio, Isaac stopped suddenly in front of a small children's boutique. He pointed to a pair of tiny baby shoes displayed in the window, his smile bright with excitement. "Isaac."
I think these would look perfect on your baby.
Amara startled.
Isaac, I don't think you need to do this. My child isn't yours.
"Isaac."
I know, but that doesn't matter. Your child is part of you, and you've already become an important part of my life.
Amara stood frozen, feeling the walls she had built around her heart start to crumble. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the kind of love that didn't demand anything in return, a love that embraced her fully, scars and all. Isaac wasn't trying to erase her past or ask her to forget it. He simply stood beside her, patiently letting her know that he would always be there. For Amara, it wasn't just a new beginning, it was the first time she felt truly seen, understood, and loved for everything she was and everything she hoped to become. As time passed, Isaac's presence in Amara's life became more than just a source of comfort. It became the foundation on which she rebuilt her trust in herself. They weren't just colleagues, they were companions, sharing the pain of old wounds and crafting new hopes together. Amara began to feel something she had thought was lost forever: genuine love and the dream of a true family. Isaac didn't just love her, he embraced the child growing in her womb, fully prepared to be the father the baby needed, without hesitation or conditions. When Mason, Amara's son, was born, it marked not just the beginning of a new life, but a symbol of her resilience and Isaac's unconditional love for their little family. From the ruins of her past, Amara and Isaac built not only a new home, but also the career of their dreams, a life filled with passion and meaning. Mason entered the world on a gentle spring morning, the sunlight in Atlanta streaming through the hospital window in soft, warm rays. In the small room, his first cries filled the air, silencing every other sound around them. Amara, utterly exhausted, felt every ounce of her pain dissipate when the nurse placed Mason in her arms. The soft warmth of Mason's tiny body against her skin felt like a miracle. As she held her son, she wasn't just cradling a child, she was holding hope and a new purpose for her life. But as she looked closely at his face, she froze. Mason bore a striking resemblance to Ethan. His deep eyes, his pursed lips, they were undeniable reminders of the man who had caused her so much pain. In that moment, Amara's heart was overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. Part of her ached at the reminder of Ethan's betrayal, but another part felt immense gratitude. Mason, despite everything, was proof of her strength and survival. Amara whispering through tears,
You are everything I need. You're not anyone's mistake. You're my hope, Mason.
Isaac stood nearby, his eyes never leaving Amara and Mason. From the moment he saw the baby, Isaac felt a deep, unshakable love for the child, even though he wasn't his biological son. He stepped closer, carefully sitting beside Amara and gently touching Mason's tiny hand. Mason instinctively wrapped his small fingers around Isaac's, and the simple gesture melted his heart. Isaac softly,
Hello, Mason. I'm so happy to finally meet you. I've been waiting for this day for so long.
Amara turned to Isaac, tears streaming down her face, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. In Isaac's eyes, she saw an authenticity and unconditional love she had never imagined she'd find again after Ethan's betrayal. Amara choking on her words.
Isaac, you don't have to do this. Mason isn't your son.
Isaac smiling, his voice steady.
Amara, your son is a part of you, and don't you know, I've loved you both for a long time.
Despite the joy of Mason's arrival, Amara struggled with the shadow of her past. Every time she saw Mason's resemblance to Ethan, the memories of betrayal and humiliation came flooding back. The harsh words, the cold dismissal, and the moment she was pushed out of that penthouse haunted her. One night, while Mason was sound asleep, Amara sat by his crib, her eyes fixed on his peaceful face. Isaac entered the room quietly and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Isaac."
Amara, are you okay?
Amara shaking her head slightly.
Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly move past it. I love Mason, but every time I look at him, I see Ethan, and I feel guilty for letting that affect how I see my own child.
Isaac sat beside her, his eyes kind but serious. "Isaac."
Amara, your past is a part of you, and I can't change that. But you don't have to face it alone. Mason isn't just a reminder of Ethan, he's proof of your strength. You overcame so much to get here. Don't let the past overshadow the incredible life you're building now.
His words were like a balm to Amara's heart, soothing the pain she had carried for so long. She turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. As time went on, Mason grew up surrounded by the unconditional love of both Isaac and Amara. Isaac embraced his role as Mason's father with unwavering dedication. He was the one who woke up in the middle of the night to soothe Mason when Amara was too exhausted, the first to change diapers, and the one who held Mason close when he wouldn't stop crying. One afternoon, as Amara prepared dinner in the kitchen, she glanced out the window and saw Isaac playing with Mason in the yard. Isaac swung Mason in his arms, making the baby laugh uncontrollably, and danced clumsily in a way only Mason could find amusing. Amara paused, a smile spreading across her face. For the first time in years, she felt whole. This little family was everything she needed, not wealth, not illusions, but genuine love, acceptance, and hope. Isaac's love wasn't just for Mason, he consistently put Amara's happiness and safety above all else. One night, as Amara sat in her office reviewing new designs, Isaac entered with a cup of warm tea in hand. "Isaac."
Hey, you've been working all day. You need to rest. If not for yourself, then for Mason.
Amara smiled, setting her pen down as she accepted the tea. Her heart swelled with warmth. "Amara."
Isaac, thank you for everything. I don't know what I'd do without you.
Isaac smiling.
We're a family, Amara, and family means facing everything together.
Amara stood before the worktable in Isaac's small studio, her gaze fixed on an unfinished sketch. The lines were still rough, the cuts incomplete, but in her mind she envisioned something far greater. These designs weren't just garments, they were stories, tales of people, places, and the values she cherished. Amara wanted her fashion to transcend superficial beauty, to embody pride and identity for people like her, Black people, whose histories were often overlooked or dismissed. Amara, her eyes alight as she spoke to Isaac.
I want every dress, every cut to tell a story. I want the wearer to feel the pride of their ancestors, the richness of their heritage. And I want to do it ethically, sustainable production, no waste, no exploitation.
Isaac, seated across from her, listened intently. He understood how immense her dream was and how challenging the path ahead would be. Yet the determination in her eyes made him certain she would succeed. "Isaac."
You're not just designing clothes, Amara. You're creating inspiration. I believe in you, and I know the world will.
Heritage by Amara began in a corner of Isaac's studio, no fancy office, no large team, just Amara and Isaac, two worktables, and a few rolls of raw fabric. The early days were grueling. Even sourcing the right materials was a hurdle. Amara insisted on natural, sustainable fabrics, but the high costs forced her to cut back in other areas. She and Isaac spent hours meeting with local suppliers, negotiating for every yard of fabric. The work was exhausting, but Amara refused to stop. By day, she poured herself into designing. By night, she cut fabrics, tested prototypes, and corrected every flaw in her garments. Many nights she fell asleep at her worktable, her hands numb from holding scissors all day. Isaac placing a steaming cup of tea before her.
You need to rest, Amara. Let me handle this part.
Amara smiling wearily.
I can't stop, Isaac. If I don't do it, who will?
Isaac.
We will. You're not doing this alone.
Isaac's patience and unwavering support became Amara's greatest source of strength as she navigated those difficult early days. Their first collection, titled Roots, was completed amid sleepless nights and constant anxiety. Each design carried profound meaning: a long dress with patterns inspired by hand-woven Ghanaian textiles, a reimagined suit honoring civil rights activists like Martin Luther King Jr., and shirts adorned with cultural symbols of Black heritage. Amara personally presented her collection at a small fashion showcase in Atlanta. Standing before the guests, her voice wavered but was filled with conviction as she explained each piece. Amara:
Every piece of fabric is a story, every stitch a tribute. I want you to feel that this is not just clothing, it's heritage.
The showcase wasn't a grand affair, but it created a ripple far beyond what Amara had imagined. A journalist from a prominent fashion magazine attended and wrote a glowing review article.
Heritage by Amara is more than fashion. It's the voice of a community. It proves that fashion can transcend materiality to become art and meaning.
Reading the article, Amara couldn't hold back her tears. She turned to Isaac, her voice breaking. Amara:
They understand, Isaac. They understand what I'm trying to do.
Isaac:
I told you, Amara. When something comes from the heart, it touches other hearts.
15 years after its inception, Heritage by Amara was more than a fashion brand. It was a cultural symbol of pride and identity. From her first collection, Roots, Amara went on to create groundbreaking collections such as Rebirth, Legacy, and Eternal. Each line wasn't just a professional milestone, but a declaration of resilience and the beauty of Black culture. At New York Fashion Week in its 15th year, Amara was invited as the lead designer for the event's biggest show. It was a landmark moment in her career. Mason, now a 15-year-old with a tall frame and his mother's bright eyes, sat in the front row beside Isaac, who had stood by Amara through every triumph and trial. Isaac watched the runway with pride, glancing at Mason, no longer a baby, but a young man, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the family they had built together. Amara's brand wasn't just a commercial success, it had redefined how the world viewed fashion. Heritage by Amara graced red carpets, featured in major campaigns, and became a cultural phenomenon. During an interview in Paris, reflecting on her 15-year journey, Amara spoke with quiet passion. Amara:
Fashion isn't just about beauty. It's a language, a medium to tell our stories. For me, every stitch carries meaning. Every garment holds a piece of history and identity.
Her words resonated far beyond the world of fashion, inspiring young designers and transforming how people viewed the industry, not as mere consumerism, but as an art form capable of preserving and celebrating culture. In the audience at her New York Fashion Week show, Isaac clasped Mason's shoulder as the lights dimmed and the first model stepped onto the runway. Amara's creations, a symphony of color, texture, and story, moved effortlessly across the stage, each piece a testament to the journey she had taken. As the final look appeared, the crowd erupted into applause. Amara emerged from backstage radiant, her smile reflecting years of struggle, resilience, and triumph. She looked toward the front row at Mason, her son, the embodiment of her strength, and Isaac, the man who had believed in her from the very beginning. In that moment, Amara knew she hadn't just achieved a dream, she had built a legacy. Mason was now 15, a tall and athletic teenager with thick black hair and deep, thoughtful eyes, the kind of eyes that sometimes left Amara frozen in place, struck by their resemblance to Ethan's. He had inherited Amara's sharp wit and energy, but his warm demeanor and steady patience were undoubtedly shaped by Isaac, who had been a constant presence in his life. Mason had grown up surrounded by Isaac and Amara's unconditional love. To him, Isaac was not just a father but also a mentor and a friend. Isaac taught him to live with integrity, to treat people with kindness, and to never abandon his dreams. One afternoon, while the family sat on their porch, Mason looked up from his sketch pad where he was drawing designs for sneakers he hoped to create one day. Mason.
Dad, how do you always know how to do the right thing?
Isaac chuckled, placing a hand on Mason's shoulder.
Isaac, I don't know everything, son. I just try to do what's best for our family. That's what matters most.
Mason gazed at Isaac, his eyes filled with admiration. He had no idea that Isaac wasn't his biological father, and to Mason, it didn't matter. Isaac had always been there, from holding him as a baby to guiding him as a young man finding his place in the world. Yet Amara knew that one day Mason would need to know the truth about his biological father. It wouldn't be easy, but she understood that her son had the right to know. The truth, though painful, would help him understand the journey that had shaped their family. One evening, Mason was sitting in Amara's office, helping her review new designs, when she approached him with a wooden box in her hands. Amara.
Mason, I think it's time. I told you about a part of our story.
Mason paused, curious but not afraid. He had always trusted his mother and father, knowing they would never withhold the truth from him. Amara opened the wooden box to reveal an old photograph, her wedding picture with Ethan. Mason studied the image, his brows furrowing as he recognized features similar to his own on the man in the photo. Mason.
Who is this? Why does he look like me?
Amara took a deep breath, reaching for her son's hand to steady herself. Amara.
That's your biological father, Mason. He's a part of my past, but he's not like Dad. He wasn't here for you, and he didn't care for you or love you the way Isaac.
Mason sat silently, his gaze shifting from the photograph to his mother's face. Amara's heart pounded, afraid that her words might hurt him. But then Mason reached out, squeezing her hand tightly. Mason.
I don't need him. Dad has always been my real father. I've known that for as long as I can remember.
Amara's tears spilled over as she leaned forward to hug her son. Amara.
Mason, I just want you to know that no matter what, you are loved. You've never been anyone's mistake or burden. You are the greatest gift I've ever received.
In the days that followed, Mason thought a lot about what his mother had shared. He didn't feel anger or sadness. Instead, he felt a deeper understanding of his family and the sacrifices they had made. One afternoon, Mason approached Isaac, who was working in the yard, fixing a piece of furniture. Mason carried the old photograph Amara had shown him. Mason.
Dad, Mom told me about my biological father.
Isaac paused, setting his tools down. He looked at Mason with a calm but thoughtful expression, ready to address whatever questions or emotions his son had. Mason.
You've known about this for a long time, haven't you?
Isaac nodding.
Yes, Mason, but I never thought it was important because it didn't change how I feel about you. I love you as my own son.
Mason looked at Isaac, his eyes filled with emotion. Mason.
You know what, Dad? I don't think it's important either. I don't need a father who wasn't there for me. I only need you.
Isaac pulled Mason into a tight embrace, his eyes glistening with tears. In that moment, no further words were needed. The bond they shared, the love and trust, was more than enough. As time passed, Heritage by Amara grew beyond a fashion brand. It became a symbol of cultural pride and identity. Every collection Amara released was a story, a declaration of heritage and resilience. She captured not just the admiration of the fashion elite, but also the hearts of millions worldwide, inspiring them to celebrate their own roots and stories. At the center of her life, however, remained her small, close-knit family. Mason, now a confident and creative 15-year-old, often accompanied her to major events. With his sharp aesthetic sense and a burgeoning talent for designing sneakers, he was already beginning to carve out his own dreams. This year's New York Fashion Week was particularly significant. It marked the 15th anniversary of Heritage by Amara, and Amara had been invited as the headlining designer, a monumental honor and a testament to her extraordinary journey. Mason and Isaac were by her side, ready to support her during this momentous occasion. But Amara had no idea that amidst the dazzling success, she would come face to face with a fragment of her past she had fought so hard to leave behind. Ethan Carter was now a name synonymous with luxury fashion. Carter Luxe had evolved from a mere brand into a global fashion empire, dominating the industry with extravagant collections and opulent ad campaigns. Ethan graced the covers of major magazines from Forbes to Vogue, celebrated as a creative genius and modern fashion mogul. Every photo captured his immaculate image-tailored suits, silver-streaked hair, and a confident smile that suggested he was untouchable. But that was only the surface. Inside, Ethan lived in a suffocating loneliness. His sprawling penthouse in the heart of Manhattan, vast, opulent, with high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and expensive decor, was little more than a glass box. Everything was on display, yet it lacked a soul. In his youth, Ethan had believed that to reach the top, he needed to cut away anything that held him back. He had done just that, sacrificing love, family, and genuine connections in his relentless pursuit of ambition. Now, standing at the pinnacle of his career, he found no fulfillment in victory. He had wealth more than he could ever spend, but nothing to fill the void inside. His collection of luxury cars sat untouched in garages. His global properties were rarely visited, and the art he acquired only served to decorate the cold walls of his penthouse. Ethan to himself,
I have everything, so why does it feel like I have nothing at all?
His relationships, if they could even be called that, lasted mere months. The women in his life were always beautiful, always dazzling, but none truly knew him. They came for his fame and money and left when they realized he had little to offer beyond expensive gifts. On late nights, as the lights of New York City sparkled outside his vast windows, Ethan often sat alone with a glass of overpriced wine. The hum of fashion shows on the TV became meaningless noise, far removed from the passion that had once driven him. The silence of his penthouse was so profound that he could hear the ticking of the clock, a constant reminder of the emptiness in his life. Occasionally, he would open a small box tucked away in his closet, containing old photographs, relics from his first marriage to Amara. He didn't know why he kept them, but he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. The photos showed a younger Amara, radiant and full of life, standing beside him in the early days of Carter Luxe. Seeing her smile brought a sharp pang to his chest, an ache he refused to name. Ethan whispering,
Amara, you once believed in me, but what did I do to that faith?
Ethan couldn't admit even to himself that he missed her. His pride convinced him that leaving her was the right decision, that he had done it to pursue what he deserved. But in his loneliest nights, he knew the truth. It wasn't that Amara wasn't worthy of him, it was that he wasn't worthy of her. The words he had said to her on their last day together,
You're not good enough for me?
Haunted him like sharp-edged ghosts. Ethan gritting his teeth.
I was wrong, but it's too late now.
At board meetings, Ethan was the central figure, making all the major decisions. Employees revered him, but no one truly knew him. Under his leadership, Carter Luxe thrived, yet the larger the empire grew, the more isolated Ethan felt. He had once believed that success would bring happiness. But now, standing in the center of the empire he had built, he realized there was no one beside him to share in his glory. During a lavish party celebrating a new Carter Luxe collection, Ethan found himself surrounded by glamorous guests. Laughter and compliments echoed around him, but it all felt hollow. As he stood with a champagne glass in hand, his gaze fell on a couple dancing nearby. The man held the woman's hand tightly, their eyes locked in a way that spoke of love and trust. The sight brought back memories of Amara, and Ethan felt a pang of regret that was impossible to ignore. He realized then that he had never truly had that real connection, unconditional love, not even with Amara. He had been too consumed by his ambition to notice what he had lost until it was too late. Ethan had avoided thinking about Amara for years, refusing to follow her life or seek updates about her. But deep down, a part of him always wondered, how was she? Was she okay? What he didn't know was that life had plans to force them to meet again. At the upcoming New York Fashion Week, where he would attend as an industry titan, Ethan would find himself face to face with the woman he had abandoned. Amara, now a symbol of empowerment and resilience in the fashion world, was no longer the woman he had cast aside. She had built a legacy of her own, one that stood as a testament to her strength and talent, a legacy that would soon cross paths with his in a way he never expected. New York Fashion Week was not just a stage for high fashion collections, but also a gathering of the industry's most powerful figures. Ethan entered the venue like a king returning to his throne, his perfectly tailored black suit accentuating his aura of authority. Yet inside, Ethan felt hollow, a void he had carried with him for 15 years. The stage lights dimmed, leaving the room in a soft darkness, with spotlights illuminating the catwalk. Ethan glanced over the program list, barely interested, until a name announced by the host froze him in place.
Heritage by Amara.
His heart pounded, and a strange ache spread through his chest. That name dragged him back to memories he had tried to bury, the final words he had said to Amara, the pain in her eyes as he turned his back on her, and all the truths he had refused to face over the years. Amara stepped onto the stage. Her elegant gown was a statement of power and freedom. She wasn't just beautiful, she was the embodiment of strength, a woman who had overcome everything to stand here, under the dazzling lights and the admiring gazes of the audience. Ethan couldn't look away. In that moment, a part of him wanted to walk up to her and apologize, to beg for her forgiveness. But his pride held him in place, leaving him to watch her from afar, like a stranger. As the spotlight turned to the front row of honored guests, Ethan's gaze fell on a teenager sitting beside Amara. The boy, dressed in a black suit, with thick black hair and strikingly familiar deep-set eyes, caught his attention immediately. It hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. Mason. He didn't need anyone to tell him he knew this was his son. The boy's face, from the sharp jawline to the piercing eyes, was a reflection of his own. A storm of emotions erupted within Ethan: shock, pain, and a crushing sense of guilt he could no longer suppress. For years, Ethan had thought he had everything, but now he realized he had lost what mattered most, a family he had once dismissed as insignificant. He remembered the words he had thrown at Amara. Ethan, in his memory.
"You're not good enough for me. I gave you everything."
Those words echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain, each syllable cutting deeper into his soul. 15 years was not a short time to let go of pain, but it was long enough to rebuild a life from the ashes. Amara had believed she had overcome everything: the betrayal, the insults, the mental wounds Ethan had inflicted. But when her eyes met his in that glittering hall, the memories surged back like a flood. She remembered their last confrontation, the luxurious penthouse where she had been emotionally and physically shattered. The insults, the cruel words, and Ethan's disdainful gaze as he walked past her to embrace his mistress were seared into her memory. Ethan in her memory.
"You're not good enough for me. Everything you have is because of me."
The forceful shove that had sent her to the floor still lingered in her mind, as did the contempt in his eyes. But now, she was no longer the weak Amara of 15 years ago. The woman standing before Ethan today was Amara Carter, a globally celebrated designer, a strong mother, and a proud partner to Isaac. Yet deep beneath the composed expression she maintained, a torrent of emotions churned: pain, anger, and a twinge of bittersweet sorrow. Not for Ethan, but for the realization that, despite her triumph, the scars of the past still lingered like an echo that refused to fade. Ethan, on the other hand, was transfixed by the sight before him. Amara wasn't just beautiful, she was radiant and commanding in a way he had never imagined. Confidence emanated from her stance, her sharp gaze, and the faint, wry smile on her lips. But what struck Ethan most was Mason. The teenager stood tall beside Amara, composed and mature, a perfect replica of Ethan himself from 15 years ago. In that moment, Ethan's heart fractured. This boy was his son, a child he had never known, never held, never heard laugh. or seen take his first steps. Looking at Mason, Ethan didn't just see his son, he saw everything he had lost. The years he had traded for ambition, the hollow relationships, and the loneliness that had defined his life all came crashing down on him. Then his eyes fell on Isaac, the man who stood beside Amara and Mason, forming the picture of a perfect family. Isaac didn't need words. The way he gently placed a hand on Mason's shoulder or the warm look he gave Amara spoke volumes. Isaac wasn't an outsider, he was the man who had taken the place Ethan had abandoned. Ethan to himself, painfully.
That should have been my place. That should have been me.
Amara noticed the change in Ethan's expression, the shock, the regret, and finally the undeniable pain. But she didn't care. Ethan was no longer a part of her life, and she wouldn't give him the power to disrupt the world she had worked so hard to build. Isaac, standing beside her, sensed the tension between them immediately. He understood this wasn't just a casual reunion of old acquaintances, it was a confrontation between a broken past and a healed present. Ethan tried to steady himself, but his voice wavered when he finally spoke. Ethan.
Amara, I need to talk to you, and to Mason.
Amara let out a soft, mirthless laugh, one laced with irony. Amara.
Talk, Ethan, what could we possibly have to say to each other? You made your choice. Don't forget that.
Isaac placed a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder, his gaze meeting Ethan's, all firm but calm. Isaac.
Ethan, this isn't the time or the place. Let Amara and Mason enjoy their evening in peace.
Isaac's words were another blow to Ethan. This wasn't just a man standing beside Amara, this was someone who protected her, someone who refused to let Ethan hurt her again. Mason, watching the exchange, finally spoke up, his curious yet steady gaze directed at Ethan. Mason to Amara.
Who is this man, Mom? Why is he looking at me like that?
Amara gently squeezed Mason's shoulder, her eyes softening as she looked at her son. Amara.
Mason, I'll explain everything later. But for now, there's no reason for us to stay here any longer.
Before leaving, she turned to Ethan one last time, her voice low but resolute. Amara.
If you want to talk, Ethan, arrange it. But tonight isn't your night.
With that, Amara and Mason walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone under the glaring lights of the hall, the brilliance only highlighting the emptiness around him. Isaac paused for a moment, locking eyes with Ethan before giving him a small nod, a quiet farewell before following Amara and Mason. Ethan stood frozen, feeling as though everything in his life had been taken from him once again, not by anyone else, but by his own choices. Amara has risen from adversity to become a symbol of resilience and self-worth. But what about Ethan? Can he find redemption? Subscribe now to follow their emotional journey and uncover a story of love, forgiveness, and the consequences of past mistakes. Ethan returned to his penthouse after the show, his mind spinning with images of Amara and Mason. He couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything but sit by the window and stare at the glittering city below. Each twinkling light seemed to reflect the emptiness inside him. Mason was his son, there was no doubt about it. But for 15 years, Ethan had been oblivious to his existence. He wasn't just a bad father, he was a man who had abandoned his family before it had even taken shape. The next morning, Ethan resolved to meet Amara. He asked a mutual acquaintance to arrange the meeting discreetly, away from the prying eyes of the media. Deep down, he knew he had no right to ask for anything, but he needed answers not for himself, but for Mason. At a small cafe, Amara waited for Ethan. She chose a quiet corner table bathed in soft light, hoping the serene setting would help her stay composed. But inside, her mind was a storm of mixed emotions, anger, pain, and exhaustion at having to face the man who had inflicted her deepest wounds. Ethan entered, his demeanor calm, but his eyes betrayed him. They were weary, heavy with emotions Amara wasn't sure she could read. He sat across from her, the space between them stretched taut with silence. Ethan exhaling softly.
Thank you for agreeing to meet me.
Amara didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the coffee cup in front of her, as though deliberating on the words strong enough to keep her from being hurt again. Amara calmly.
"What do you want to say, Ethan?"
Ethan lowered his head, his hands clasped tightly together, a habit he only had when he was nervous. Taking a deep breath, his voice came out unsteady. "Ethan."
"Amara, Mason is my son, isn't he? I knew it the moment I saw him."
The question didn't surprise Amara. She had been expecting it since the night before and knew she couldn't avoid the truth forever. But that didn't make it any easier to answer. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze directly, unflinching, unwavering. "Amara."
"Yes, Mason is your son, but you chose to leave us a long time ago. That truth doesn't change anything, Ethan."
Ethan felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. He had thought that his recognition and remorse might pave the way for redemption, but Amara's answer landed like a cold slap, extinguishing even that faint hope. Ethan lowering his head, his voice hoarse.
"I didn't know. I didn't think you."
Amara cutting him off, her tone sharp but controlled.
"Don't make excuses. You didn't think, Ethan. That has always been your problem. You only ever thought about yourself, your ambition, what you wanted. And because of that, you chose to abandon me, to abandon Mason, even though you didn't know he existed."
Amara leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting out the window to the world beyond, a world where people lived their lives untethered by the past, unlike her. She took a deep breath, steadying her voice to keep it from breaking. "Amara."
"When you threw me out of that penthouse, Ethan, I had nothing. I didn't just lose the man I loved. I lost my faith in myself. But I got back up. I did everything to protect Mason and give him a better life. Isaac was there. You weren't."
Ethan clenched his hands tighter, the weight of guilt pressing down on him until he could barely breathe. "Ethan."
"I know I was wrong. But Amara, please let me do something for Mason. I don't want to destroy the family you've built, but he deserves to know the truth about his father."
Amara turned back to him, her eyes sharp as daggers. "Amara."
"Mason doesn't need you. He grew up in a family full of love, with a real father, someone who has always been there without needing an excuse. You have no place in his life, Ethan. Not now, not ever."
Ethan didn't respond. He knew Amara was right. He had destroyed every chance to be part of Mason's life, and now he was left to face the loneliness he had created. As Amara rose to leave, Ethan tried to say something, but the words caught in his throat. He could only watch as she walked away, the woman he had once dismissed, now a symbol of strength and resilience. Before leaving, Amara turned back, her voice soft but firm. "Amara."
"Ethan, I don't hate you, but I don't need you, and neither does Mason."
As her figure disappeared from sight, Ethan sat silently in the cafe, his vision blurred. For the first time in years, he felt tears streaming down his face, not for his career or his failures, but for the emptiness in his heart that he had created himself. Returning to his empty penthouse, Ethan found no solace in his surroundings. The dazzling lights, expensive paintings on the walls, and the silence he once equated with success now only suffocated him. Images of Amara, Mason, and Isaac spun relentlessly in his mind, each one a painful reminder of what he had lost. But what lingered most was Mason's gaze, not one of innocent curiosity, but one that seemed to judge him, demanding answers to questions he couldn't even face himself. Standing by the window, Ethan looked out at the glowing city beneath him, his chest heavy with emotions he couldn't name. That boy was his son, there was no denying it. But Mason had grown up without him, and Ethan now doubted whether he had any place in his son's life at all. Ethan hoarsely, to himself.
"I can't let it end like this. Mason deserves the truth, and I need to atone for what I've done."
Yet the thought of Isaac gave him pause. That man hadn't just replaced him as a father, he had become the role model Mason looked up to, a connection Ethan couldn't ignore. Even so, Ethan resolved to act. He didn't know if he could ever be forgiven, but he couldn't continue living in silence and regret. He had to meet Mason, had to find a way to talk to his son, no matter the obstacles. But Ethan was unaware that his presence would not only confuse Mason but also heighten Isaac's sense of duty to protect his family. This encounter would not simply be an apology, it would be a clash between the past and the present, between Ethan's mistakes and the responsibility Isaac had carried for the past 15 years. Ethan, burdened by guilt, would have to face not only Mason's rejection but also Isaac's firm assertion that this family no longer had a place for him. That afternoon, Mason stepped out of the school gates, his face still alight with the excitement of the day. But the moment his eyes landed on the man standing quietly by the roadside, that feeling evaporated instantly. Ethan Carter, dressed in a crisp black suit and exuding an air of elegance, stood there like a ghost from the past. Mason recognized him immediately. Not because they had met before, but because of the stories his mother had told him, and more vividly, the photograph in the box Amara had shown him a year ago. He had seen that face, though only through a faded picture. Mason's initial reaction wasn't confusion, it was anger. What was this man doing here, after all these years? Why now, when Mason's family was happy and whole, did he decide to appear? Gripping the strap of his backpack tightly, Mason slowed his pace, his expression shifting from curiosity to caution. As Ethan took a hesitant step forward, Mason stopped completely. Mason coldly.
"What do you want from me?"
Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his hands clasped together as if to steady his nerves. He had rehearsed countless ways to start this conversation, but as he faced Mason's sharp, unyielding gaze, every word seemed to abandon him. Ethan's voice hoarse.
"Mason, I just want to talk to you. I know it's too late, but I can't ignore this chance anymore."
Mason let out a bitter laugh, a sound Ethan had never imagined his son could make. Mason.
"Dad, you're calling me your son? That's rich. You think showing up and saying a few words will make things okay? Where were you for the last 15 years?
The question was like a knife, and Ethan felt his chest tighten. He knew Mason had every right to be angry, but that didn't make the words sting any less. Ethan.
"I have no excuses, but I'm here now, Mason. I want to make things right. I don't expect forgiveness right away, but please just give me a chance to make amends."
Mason stared at him, his gaze growing colder and more piercing. Mason's voice rising.
"Make amends? Who do you think you are? Do you think just because you have money and power, you can walk into my life whenever you feel like it? That's not how family works."
Ethan took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but each word from Mason felt like a direct blow. He realized that Mason wasn't just angry, he was deeply disappointed, a wound Ethan feared he could never heal. Mason.
"My family doesn't need you. I don't need you. My dad is the one who's always been there for me, the one who taught me how to live the right way, and the one who loves my mom with all his heart. You don't deserve to call me your son, and you can never replace Dad Isaac."
Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Mason cut him off, his voice trembling with emotion. "Mason.
You abandoned my mom when she needed you most. You abandoned me before I was even born. And now you're here for what? To make things better? You're too late. My family is whole."
Ethan stood speechless. Mason's words didn't just lay bare the truth of what he had done, they underscored the reality that there was no place for him in the boy's life. His throat tightened, his feet felt leaden, unable to move forward or retreat. Ethan softly, almost whispering.
I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Please, Mason, give me a chance."
Mason's gaze didn't waver. His eyes held no trace of warmth, only a steely resolve that spoke louder than words. "I don't care." Without another word, Mason turned and walked away. He didn't look back. When he reached the car waiting by the curb, Isaac opened the door. The ever-present smile on Isaac's face faded into concern as he noticed Mason's tense expression. Mason climbed into the car and slammed the door shut with such force that Ethan flinched. He said nothing to Isaac about the encounter, but Isaac seemed to understand everything from the look in his eyes. Ethan remained rooted to the spot, his feet seemingly glued to the ground. He didn't know what to do. Mason hadn't just rejected him, he had rejected the very notion that Ethan could ever play a role in his life. That day, Isaac entered the cafe with his usual calm demeanor, though beneath the surface, a storm brewed. The sight of Ethan sitting there with a weary expression made Isaac pause for a brief second to compose himself, resisting the urge to confront him loudly. Isaac wasn't a man who angered easily, but the fact that Ethan had approached Mason without going through Amara first crossed a line. For Isaac, family was everything, and he would not allow anyone, especially Ethan, to hurt Amara or Mason. Isaac pulled out a chair and sat down, his piercing gaze locking onto Ethan. This wasn't just a conversation, it was Isaac's chance to protect the family he and Amara had built. Isaac's voice cold and sharp.
You thought it was a good idea to approach Mason without talking to Amara first. You thought you had the right to do that?
Ethan, prepared for tension, but still unsettled by Isaac's icy tone, tightened his jaw and clasped his hands together on the table, as if searching for an anchor. Ethan softly.
I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just want to be a father to Mason, even if it's just a little.
Isaac let out a mirthless chuckle, the sound dripping with both irony and seriousness. Isaac.
A father? Now? After 15 years? Do you even know what Amara had to do to protect Mason from...
Ethan looked up, his guilty eyes meeting Isaac's unyielding stare. The weight of the accusation pressed down on him, but he couldn't find any words to defend himself. Isaac's voice rising, anger bubbling to the surface.
You didn't just leave her, Ethan. You humiliated her. You hurt her, and you turned the first years of Mason's life into a nightmare. Amara had to pick herself up, alone. She worked from dawn till midnight in a rundown factory just to afford diapers. She endured society's judgment because she was a black woman, because she was a single mother.
Ethan swallowed hard as Isaac's words hit him like a barrage of punches. Images he had long tried to suppress clawed their way back. Amara kneeling on the floor of the penthouse, her tear-streaked face as he coldly cast her out. Isaac's voice lowering but still firm.
And while you enjoyed your life of luxury, Amara fought tooth and nail to raise your son. Don't tell me now that you want to make it right. Regret isn't enough, Ethan. It never will be.
Ethan dropped his head, his hands trembling as they rested on the table. He didn't know what to say because Isaac was right. Everything Isaac described, everything Ethan had done was inexcusable. Ethan hoarsely.
I know I was wrong. I have no excuses. But Mason, he's my son. I just want a chance to do something right for him.
Isaac shook his head slowly, disappointment etched in every line of his face. Isaac.
Your son, Ethan, being a father isn't about blood. Mason doesn't know you and he doesn't need you. He has a family, a mother who gave up everything to raise him, and a father who's been there every step of the way to love and protect him. This family has no place for you.
Ethan raised his head, his voice shaky but filled with desperation as he met Isaac's eyes. Ethan.
I'm not trying to take your family away from you. I just want Mason to know I regret what I've done. I want to show him that I can change.
Isaac placed his hand lightly on the table, the small motion halting Ethan's words like a firm wall. Isaac decisively.
Your regret means nothing to Mason. He grew up without you. Don't make him a tool for your redemption. Amara taught him everything he needed to know, and I taught him how to live with integrity. Mason is fine without...
Ethan opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came. He slumped slightly in his seat, the weight of helplessness settling over him. Isaac stood, adjusting his jacket as his gaze remained fixed on Ethan. Isaac calm but resolute.
I don't hate you, Ethan, but I will never let you hurt this family again. Mason doesn't need you, and neither does Amara. Goodbye.
As Isaac walked away, Ethan remained seated, staring down at the untouched cup of coffee in front of him. Isaac's final words echoed in his mind, Mason doesn't need you. In that moment, Ethan realized that his journey for redemption wasn't just difficult, it may have been doomed from the start. not because he didn't want to try, but because he simply didn't deserve it. Ethan stepped out of the cafe into the biting cold, the chill outside mirroring the emptiness within him. Isaac's words still echoed relentlessly in his mind.
Mason doesn't need you, and neither does Amara.
Yet Ethan couldn't let go. Despite knowing he wasn't welcome, a relentless urge gnawed at him. He had to do something, had to break through the wall, separating him from his son.
Mason has to understand that I've changed. I won't give up,
he told himself. On the other hand, Mason was equally unwilling to let things lie. Ethan's sudden appearance didn't just unsettle him, it ignited a smoldering anger he had buried deep within. Mason had often wondered who his biological father was and why he hadn't been there. But now that Ethan had shown up after all these years, all Mason felt was hatred. That evening, as the family gathered, Mason couldn't hold back his feelings any longer. Mason angrily.
Who does he think he is? Does he really think just showing up will make everything okay? He's nothing to...
Amara remained silent, her expression laced with worry as she watched her son. Isaac placed a steady hand on Mason's shoulder, his gaze gentle yet firm. Isaac.
Mason, I understand you're angry, but you need to keep calm. The best way to protect our family is not to let your anger control you.
Mason nodded reluctantly, but the fire inside him didn't subside. He couldn't stand the idea of staying silent. He wanted Ethan to understand that he had no right to come back and disrupt their lives like this. The tension between them reached its breaking point when Mason decided to confront Ethan directly. He wanted to make sure Ethan knew exactly how unwelcome he was. But during their confrontation, an unexpected and dangerous event unfolded, a moment that put Mason's life in peril. In that harrowing instant, Mason was forced to reconsider everything: his feelings about Ethan, the possibility of forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. The press conference for Carter Lux took place in the grand ballroom of a prestigious five-star hotel in New York City. The luxurious setting, with sparkling crystal chandeliers and perfectly aligned seating, was filled with powerful figures from the fashion industry and eager journalists. Ethan Carter, the founder and CEO of the brand, stepped onto the stage with his usual confidence. Ethan thrived in events like these. He was the epitome of success: charismatic, sharp, and ever determined to assert his dominance. In the dazzling light of the cameras and amidst the applause, Ethan wore his signature smile. To the audience, this was his stage. But unbeknownst to him, it was also where he would confront a truth he could no longer escape. At the back of the room, Mason stood quietly, his sharp gaze fixed on Ethan. His fists clenched tightly at his sides as he struggled to contain the anger boiling within. Mason hadn't come to listen to Ethan, he had come to say what he'd been holding back for far too long. As the Q&A session began, Ethan was in the middle of answering a question about Carter Lux's expansion into Asia when Mason suddenly stood up. Mason raising his voice.
Mr. Ethan Carter, do you think someone who abandoned his family has the right to talk about responsibility?
The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the tall, composed teenager whose challenging voice cut through the air. Some journalists gasped at the audacity of the question, while others instinctively raised their cameras, the flashes lighting up the room like a storm. Ethan, standing under the spotlight, froze, his eyes locked onto Mason's, disbelief etched on his face. He tried to steady himself, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Ethan, taking a deep breath, attempting professionalism.
I don't know who you are, but if you have a question, please be respectful and professional.
Mason took a step forward, his voice growing louder, more resolute. Mason.
You don't know who I am? I'm Mason, your son.
A wave of shock rippled through the room. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every moment. Guests whispered in astonishment, while others stared at Ethan, who remained motionless, his face rigid with disbelief. Mason moved closer, his piercing gaze never leaving Ethan. Years of bottled-up pain, resentment, and anger erupted like a volcano, He wasn't speaking just for himself, he was speaking for his mother, who had endured what Ethan wanted to forget. Mason, voice commanding.
You abandoned my mother when she needed you the most. You threw her out with nothing, not caring that she was pregnant with me. Do you think someone like that deserves respect?
The words hit the room like a thunderclap. The atmosphere grew even tenser, with every journalist leaning forward, capturing the moment either in notes or through lenses. Ethan stood paralyzed on the stage, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool air-conditioned room. For the first time in his life, he had no idea what to do or say. Ethan, voice shaky, attempting control.
Mason, this isn't the place for this. If you want to talk, we can find somewhere private.
Mason let out a cold, bitter laugh. Mason.
Private? Are you afraid of being exposed in front of everyone? Don't worry, I'll keep it brief so everyone can understand. You're a coward.
The relentless flashes from the cameras captured Ethan's faltering composure. His carefully curated image of perfection began to crumble under the weight of Mason's words. Mason stepped closer to the stage, his voice rising with every word, each one a verdict against Ethan. Mason.
You lived in luxury, enjoying your life while my mom worked herself to the bone just to raise me. Did you ever think about us? Or was your precious reputation and career the only thing that mattered to you?
The journalists seized the moment to ask their own questions. Journalist 1 in disbelief.
Mr. Ethan Carter, is this true? Is he really your son?
Journalist 2.
How will this affect Carter Lux's image?
Ethan's world began to spiral out of control. The room seemed to spin, and he felt powerless to regain his footing. Ethan's voice barely above a whisper.
Mason, I know I was wrong. I'm trying to make things right, please.
But Mason cut him off. Mason, sharp, unyielding.
Make things right? Do you think you can just waltz back into our lives and fix everything? You abandoned us when my mom needed you most, when she was carrying me. And now you want to act like nothing happened. It's ridiculous.
Turning to the audience, Mason addressed the room. Mason.
Look at him. Ethan Carter, the man you praise, the man you admire, is someone who abandoned his family. He only cares about running from responsibility while enjoying his wealth.
The silence in the room was suffocating. Some journalists stopped taking notes, while others furiously typed or shouted questions at Ethan. Journalist 3.
Mr. Carter, is this true? Is he your son?
Journalist 4.
How will this impact Carter Lux's reputation?
Ethan tried to speak, but no sound came out. He was consumed by a sense of helplessness, every question a dagger piercing the image he had spent his life crafting. Mason gave Ethan one last, piercing look, his voice steady and unwavering. Mason.
You're not my father. You never were.
With that, Mason turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone on the stage under the unforgiving glare of cameras and judgmental eyes. Ethan remained frozen, feeling as though everything he had built had crumbled. For the first time in his life, he didn't just feel defeated, he felt like he no longer belonged in the world he had created. Across the city, Amara and Isaac watched the press conference on television. Isaac shook his head, placing a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder. Isaac.
The boy said everything he needed to, but I worry this isn't the end.
Amara clasped her hands tightly, her eyes filled with concern. Amara.
Mason can't hold on to this anger forever, but he's still too young to understand how much it will hurt him in the end.
The incident quickly became headline news. Tabloids and online media exploded with sensational coverage.
Ethan Carter's secret son. The truth about the Carter Lux founder? The perfect image shattered. Mason, a voice for justice or a teen's wrath.
Social media was ablaze. User 1.
Ethan Carter is a hypocrite. Absolutely disgusting.
User 2.
I admire Mason for standing up. What a brave young man.
User 3.
This shouldn't be public, but it's clear Ethan Carter has a lot to answer for.
Meanwhile, Carter Lux's board of directors held an emergency meeting, worried about the scandal's impact on the brand. Ethan, who had always been in control, now found himself at the center of a storm of criticism and doubt. Mason walked out of the hotel, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. He had said everything he wanted to at the press conference, yet the anger burning within him hadn't subsided. Instead, it had only grown heavier, wrapping him in a sense of emptiness he hadn't anticipated. New York's nighttime streets reflected Mason's inner turmoil. The shimmering streetlights, the rush of cars, and the constant hum of the city all felt oppressive. Mason wanted to escape to find a quiet corner where he could ask himself whether this unrelenting rage was truly worth it. Behind him, Ethan lingered outside the hotel, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. He watched Mason's retreating figure disappear into the crowd, a wave of unease surging through him, Ethan to himself.
Mason doesn't need me, but he doesn't understand what he's doing. I have to protect him even from afar.
Ethan signaled his driver to stop the car and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Keeping a cautious distance, he followed Mason into the bustling New York streets, his gaze never leaving his son. He made sure to stay close enough to intervene if necessary, yet far enough not to reveal himself. As Mason wandered aimlessly, his thoughts replayed the scene from the press conference. The image of Ethan on stage, his face painted with helplessness and pain, resurfaced over and over in his mind. But instead of softening Mason's anger, it only fueled the fire that had raged within him for years. Mason muttering under his breath.
He thinks he can just show up and fix everything? He doesn't have that right, not ever.
Lost in his thoughts, Mason didn't notice as he veered away from the bustling sidewalks into a less crowded intersection. The traffic lights flickered yellow, and he stepped onto the crosswalk without looking, his mind too clouded to register the danger around him. From a distance, Ethan saw it happen. His chest tightened as he noticed Mason wandering into the hazardous intersection, the headlights of rushing cars casting sharp beams of light across his son's silhouette. Ethan, heart racing.
No, Mason, stop, you don't see it.
As Mason reached the middle of the intersection, a large truck rounded the corner, its blinding headlights piercing through the night. The truck's horn blared, a deafening warning that startled Mason out of his haze. Mason startled, muttering.
What the ID?
He froze. His legs felt like they were glued to the pavement, and he couldn't move. The cacophony of honking horns and distant shouts from pedestrians barely registered in his ears. Ethan, watching from the sidewalk, acted without hesitation. All his regrets, fears, and instincts converged in that moment. He knew exactly what he had to do. Ethan shouting, voice breaking.
Mason, move.
But Mason didn't respond. Without another thought, Ethan sprinted toward his son, his legs moving faster than he thought possible. Fueled by a deep, unrelenting love for Mason, Ethan reached the boy just in time, shoving him forcefully toward the safety of the curb. Mason tumbled to the sidewalk, rolling several times before coming to a stop. His wide, terrified eyes locked on Ethan, who didn't have time to save himself. The truck screeched as it braked, the tires screaming against the asphalt, but it was too late. The impact sent Ethan flying across the intersection, his body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The horrified gasps and shouts of onlookers filled the air. Mason sat on the cold pavement, his hands bracing against the ground, staring at Ethan's crumpled form in the middle of the road. The man he had spent his life resenting, whom he had vowed to hate forever, was now lying motionless, blood pooling under him beneath the harsh glow of streetlights. Mason whispering, voice trembling.
Why? Why would he do that? He didn't have to.
With shaking legs, Mason rose to his feet, each step toward Ethan feeling heavier than the last. Conflicted emotions stormed within him. Anger. How could he forgive someone who had caused his mother so much pain? Ethan had abandoned them, leaving his mother to endure everything on her own. Compassion, yet the image of Ethan throwing himself into danger to save him lingered in Mason's mind. The man hadn't hesitated, hadn't thought twice. Confusion, Mason wanted to yell at Ethan, to blame him for every tear his mother had shed, yet a small part of him wanted to kneel beside him and hold his hand. Mason dropped to his knees next to Ethan, his trembling hands resting on the man's shoulder. Blood from a gash on Ethan's forehead trickled down, staining the pavement like a ticking clock. Mason shouting, voice breaking with anger and fear.
"You idiot! Why did you do that? You didn't have to. You didn't have to save me."
Ethan's eyes fluttered open, weak and unfocused. He barely managed to lift a hand, reaching toward Mason with what little strength he had left. Ethan weakly, voice faltering.
"Are you okay?"
Mason bit his lip hard, his tears spilling over despite his best efforts to hold them back. The anger in his voice softened, replaced by a tremble. Mason choking on his words.
"You're so stupid. Do you think this changes anything? Do you think saving me will make up for everything you—"
Despite his pale complexion, Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile. Ethan barely audible.
"No, I don't expect forgiveness, but I couldn't let you get hurt. You're my—"
The words hit Mason like a tidal wave, washing over the barriers he had built within himself. For years, he had told himself Ethan wasn't his father. But now, as he knelt beside the man who had risked everything to save him, Mason couldn't deny a simple truth: Ethan had acted like a father in the purest sense. Mason whispering, tears falling.
"You made my mom suffer. You left us. But why? Why would you save me now?"
Ethan didn't answer. His eyes slowly began to close, and Mason's heart leapt in panic. He gripped Ethan's hand tightly, refusing to let go. Mason shouting,
"Don't you dare die on me. Do you hear me? Don't you dare. Don't make me hate you even more."
The blaring sirens of an approaching ambulance filled the air. Paramedics rushed to Ethan's side, but Mason never let go of his hand, clinging to him as though it was the only thing grounding him to reality. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Mason sat beside Ethan, his tear-streaked face pale but resolute. For the first time in his life, Mason felt something other than hatred when he looked at Ethan, a tangled knot of anger, sorrow, and a faint, flickering gratitude. Mason to himself, thoughts conflicted: "I can't forgive you. Not yet. But I can't deny what you've done tonight." In his heart, Mason knew this act wouldn't erase the past, but it had changed something undeniable. Ethan Carter had saved his life, no matter the cost. The hospital was wrapped in the strange stillness of the night. Fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead, and the faint sound of nurses' footsteps echoed down the hall, blending with the heavy silence that filled Ethan's room. He woke to the dull ache of his bandaged arm, the pounding in his head, and the oppressive solitude that surrounded him. Mason was gone. No goodbye, no lingering words, just an emptiness Ethan couldn't begin to fill. The memory of Mason gripping his hand in the ambulance played in Ethan's mind like a fleeting glimpse of hope. But now, as he lay in the sterile hospital bed, he wondered if his sacrifice had done anything to bridge the chasm between him and his son, or if it had only highlighted the unchangeable distance of the 15 years he had squandered. Elsewhere in the city, Amara and Isaac sat side by side on their living room couch, their eyes fixed on the news broadcast replaying the accident. Amara's face hardened as the screen displayed Ethan's bloodied shirt, conjuring painful memories she had worked so hard to bury. Amara whispering, her voice cold.
"He's still the same, always acting when it's too late."
Isaac turned toward her, his gaze filled with concern and quiet understanding. He knew that, deep down, Amara wasn't entirely indifferent to what Ethan had done. Isaac gently.
"He saved Mason. That has to mean something, doesn't it?"
Amara didn't respond immediately. She thought back to the look in Ethan's eyes at the press conference, the sincerity she once believed he'd lost long ago. Yet his reckless sacrifice for Mason left her unsettled, forcing her to confront emotions she thought she had buried. Amara softly, almost to herself.
Mason is all he has left. If he can't protect that, then what does he have?
Isaac remained silent, knowing Amara's words were true. But he couldn't ignore the reality that their family had endured too much to be dragged back into the shadow of their shared past. A few days later, when Ethan was discharged from the hospital, he returned to his opulent penthouse. It was as pristine and luxurious as ever, everything in its place, except for Ethan himself. There were no flashing lights, no reporters waiting for a statement, just the echoing stillness of a man left alone to confront his own failures. Standing by the window, Ethan gazed down at the glittering lights of the city below. New York was alive, pulsing with energy, but within him, everything was silent and hollow. Ethan to himself, bitterly.
I saved my son, but it doesn't change anything. I'm still just a lonely man.
He began to realize that his guilt would never be enough. Every action he had taken trying to reach Mason, risking his life to save him, was simply another way to avoid facing the unchangeable truth the past could not be undone. While Ethan sank into his solitude, Amara, Isaac, and Mason continued their lives as a true family. After the accident, Mason became noticeably quieter. The conflicting emotions in his heart left him unsure how to speak about Ethan, but the steady presence of Isaac and Amara helped him find a sense of peace. One evening, Isaac placed a reassuring hand on Mason's shoulder, his voice calm and warm. Isaac,
you don't have to decide anything right now. Let things unfold naturally. We'll always be here.
Mason nodded, his eyes reflecting gratitude. No matter what Ethan did, Mason knew his true family was with Amara and Isaac, the two people who had been there for him through it all. One night, Ethan received a letter from Mason. It wasn't long, nor was it overflowing with emotion, but each handwritten line carried a quiet finality that Ethan couldn't ignore. Mason in the letter.
You saved me, and I'll never forget that, but I still need time. Don't come looking for me. If there's ever a day I want to talk, I'll find you.
Ethan sat frozen, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. Part of him felt a glimmer of relief Mason hadn't completely shut him out, but the rest of him remained consumed by the bitter ache of solitude. Ethan whispering, his eyes fixed on the endless city lights.
Mason doesn't need me, but at least he's alive. That's the only thing that matters.
Ethan's world crumbled piece by piece as he sat alone in his expansive penthouse, the once pristine view of the New York skyline doing little to soothe the storm raging within him. The headlines, the accusations, and the loss of his company, all of it played on a loop in his mind, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. The scandal that had erupted wasn't just a blemish on his reputation, it was an annihilation. Carter Lux, the empire he had painstakingly built, now stood as a monument to his hubris and failures, condemned by the very people who once revered it. In the days following his forced resignation, Ethan became a recluse. The luxurious penthouse, once a haven of power and prestige, had transformed into a gilded prison. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. He scrolled through social media on his phone, each comment and post a dagger to his already shattered ego. Twitter users. Finally, the truth comes out. Ethan Carter is the reason so many suffer while he basks in luxury. Amara deserves every ounce of her success. Ethan? He deserves this fall from grace.
This is why we need to hold powerful men accountable. Ethan Carter is just the tip of the iceberg.
Ethan threw the phone onto the couch, his hands shaking. His mind wandered to the accusations, the testimonies of former employees, the leaked recordings, and the damning articles painting him as a predator and an oppressor. He wanted to believe they were exaggerations, distortions meant to destroy him. But deep down, he couldn't deny the kernel of truth in them. Flashback in the early days of Carter Lux, Ethan had been relentless. He had demanded perfection from his employees, often crossing lines that should never have been crossed. The late-night meetings, the shouted orders, the dismissal of anyone who dared challenge him. It had all been justified in his mind as the cost of building an empire. But now, those moments haunted him. The faces of people he had wronged, assistants, designers, and even factory workers, flashed before him. He remembered the desperation in their eyes, the quiet acceptance of his dominance. And then there was Amara. The memories of their final days together clawed at his conscience. He could still see the look on her face as she stood in the doorway of their penthouse, pregnant and devastated, as he hurled words he could never take back. Ethan in memory.
You don't deserve to be here. Everything you have is because of me.
He had said it to hurt her, to solidify his control. Now those words echoed in his mind like a curse. Ethan tried to busy himself with tasks, but nothing could drown out the voices accusing him both externally and internally. He had lost the company, the respect of his peers, and any hope of redemption in the public eye. One night, as he sat by the window with a glass of whiskey in hand, Ethan allowed himself a moment of unvarnished truth. Ethan to himself, voice trembling.
It wasn't just the media or the board that destroyed me. I did this to myself. I became everything I swore I wouldn't.
The realization hit him like a blow. For years, he had told himself that success justified his methods, that the sacrifices his family, his integrity, his humanity were all necessary. But now, stripped of everything, he saw those sacrifices for what they were: cowardice, greed, and an inability to face his own inadequacies. Meanwhile, the world moved on. Amara, Isaac, and Mason thrived in their shared life, unaffected by the storm surrounding Ethan. In interviews, Amara's grace and strength shone through, further amplifying the stark contrast between her rise and Ethan's fall. Amara in an interview.
I don't dwell on the past. My focus is on the future, on my son, on my work, and on creating a legacy that reflects my values.
Her words were a balm to her supporters and a knife to Ethan, who watched from the sidelines as she flourished in the light while he withered in the dark. As the weeks passed, Ethan began to withdraw even further. The calls from former colleagues and friends dwindled until they stopped altogether. He was no longer a powerful figure worth associating with. He was a cautionary tale. One evening, he received an envelope in the mail. It was from Mason. Inside was a simple, handwritten note. Mason in the note.
You saved me, but it doesn't erase what you've done. I'm not ready to forgive you. Don't contact me. If the time ever comes, I'll decide if I want to see you again.
Ethan clutched the letter, tears streaming down his face. Mason's words, though distant and firm, were the only connection he had left to the family he had destroyed. Ethan whispering.
I can't blame you, Mason. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you for not cutting me out completely.
As he sat in the oppressive silence of his penthouse, Ethan realized that his path to redemption, if it existed, would not be about reclaiming what he had lost. It would be about becoming a man who could face himself in the mirror. For the first time, Ethan didn't reach for a drink to numb the pain. Instead, he stared out at the city, a faint flicker of determination lighting in his chest. Ethan to himself, voice resolute.
If there's any chance to fix what I've broken, I'll take it, even if it takes the rest of my life.
After the series of overwhelming events, from the accident, the public confrontation, to Ethan's removal from Carter, Lux Mason found himself in a state of deep inner conflict. He felt as though he stood between two worlds. On one side was his true family, Amara and Isaac, who had always loved and protected him. On the other side was Ethan, his biological father, a man who had caused so much pain, but had also just sacrificed himself to save Mason. The bursts of anger no longer erupted as they once did, but they hadn't disappeared completely. Mason realized that the more he held on to his hatred, the heavier it felt, trapping him in a vortex of negative emotions. Mason to himself, eyes contemplative.
Forgiveness isn't about whether he deserves it. Forgiveness is about freeing myself so I can move forward without this burden weighing me down.
The soft glow of sunset bathed the park, turning the cobblestone paths into ribbons of golden light. Mason sat on a bench near the fountain, his gaze fixed on his tightly clasped hands, as if searching for strength within himself. He had thought long and hard before deciding to meet Ethan. For Mason, this meeting wasn't about reconciliation, it was about freeing himself. The hatred he felt for Ethan had become a defining part of his life for so many years, but now he realized it wasn't just a burden, it was a chain anchoring him to the past. When Ethan appeared in the distance, his tall frame seemed visibly thinner. He walked slowly, his trembling hands lightly clasped together. He stopped a few steps away from Mason, as if afraid to disturb the quiet serenity of the evening. Ethan softly,
"Thank you for agreeing to meet me."
Mason looked up. His eyes no longer burned with fiery anger, but neither did they show warmth. They were cold and resolute like the words he was about to say. Mason,
"I didn't come here to make peace. I just want to make a few things clear."
Ethan froze. He nodded, though a flicker of disappointment crossed his eyes. He understood he had no right to expect anything more. Mason sat back down on the bench, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped together. The tension in his voice had eased, but his gaze remained firm as he looked at Ethan. "Mason,
"I already have a family. My mom and dad Isaac mean everything to me. They've been there for me, loved me, and sacrificed for me. Nothing, not even your apologies, can change that."
Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He had anticipated this, but hearing it directly from Mason still made his chest tighten. Even so, he didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes filled with sorrow yet also acceptance. Ethan, his voice trembling.
"I understand. You have a good family. I don't want to disrupt that. I just want you to know how deeply I regret everything."
Mason remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he stood up, his eyes softening slightly, though his voice retained its firmness. "Mason,
"You saved my life, and I thank you for that. But it doesn't change the past."
Ethan didn't reply. He simply watched as Mason turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the fading golden hues of the sunset. When Mason was gone, Ethan remained seated, his gaze lingering on the cobblestone path. Inside him, a hollow emptiness loomed, but the restless unease was no longer there. He felt a sense of relief, but also a pain that lingered like a dull, persistent ache. Ethan whispering to himself,
"You don't need me, but at least you've forgiven me. That's all I could ask for."
As the evening faded, the park was gradually engulfed in shadow. Ethan stood and began walking away slowly, each step deliberate, as though he was relearning how to stand steady on his feet. For the first time, he wasn't trying to hold on to anything. Instead, he let it all go, learning to accept what was beyond his control. The journey of forgiveness is never easy, especially when the past is fraught with pain and mistakes. Do you think Ethan deserves forgiveness? Share this channel and join the discussion as we follow the next chapter in this deeply moving story. Ethan had thought long and hard before deciding to contact Isaac. His journey of redemption could never be complete without directly facing the man who had stepped into Amara and Mason's lives, filling the role Ethan had abandoned. Ethan sent a brief email, not expecting Isaac to agree. But one morning, a reply came email from Isaac.
"I agree to meet you, but only to hear what you have to say. Don't think I'm doing this for you."
The meeting was arranged at a small cafe on a quiet street, not far from where Isaac and Amara lived. Ethan arrived early, sitting in a secluded corner, his expression a mix of exhaustion and tension. When Isaac entered, his calm demeanor and sharp gaze carried an unspoken authority that made Ethan's chest tighten. Ethan sat quietly in the cafe's shadowed corner, his coffee growing cold and untouched. The once proud ambition in his eyes had dulled to a weary, hollow gaze. The cafe door swung open softly, and Isaac stepped inside. Tall, composed and purposeful, Isaac exuded a quiet confidence that immediately drew Ethan's attention. As Isaac approached the table, Ethan instinctively stood, his hands trembling slightly with unease. Isaac regarded him with a measured gaze, not angry, but devoid of warmth. Isaac in a calm, steady voice.
I didn't come here to make friends, Ethan. Say what you need to say.
Ethan nodded, briefly unsettled by Isaac's bluntness. He hadn't expected a warm reception, but the unyielding directness still unsettled him. Ethan sat down, struggling to find the words he'd rehearsed countless times. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough and quiet. Ethan.
I know I am the cause of all the pain Amara has endured. I was wrong, more wrong than anyone could imagine, and I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness on her behalf.
Isaac raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze cutting through Ethan's uncertainty. He said nothing, the silence pressing Ethan to continue. Ethan.
I just want to say, thank you. You took care of Amara and Mason. The very thing I should have done from the beginning. You gave Mason a home, a real family. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to understand how grateful I am.
Isaac leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes never leaving Ethan. The words didn't soften him, but he recognized the sincerity behind them. When Ethan fell silent, Isaac leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped, his gaze growing even sharper, as if to ensure his words struck their target. Isaac.
You're right. You were wrong, and what you did to Amara is something I will never forgive. She went through hell because of you, and Mason grew up without needing you. This family doesn't need you. They never have.
Ethan lowered his head, the words cutting deep despite his anticipation. But Isaac wasn't finished, his tone softening slightly, adding a deeper weight to his message. Isaac.
But that doesn't mean I hold on to hate. This family has moved past you, and I will make sure they never endure any more pain, not from you or anyone else.
Ethan looked up, his eyes red but carrying a glimmer of relief. He couldn't undo the past, but at least Amara and Mason were safe and protected in a way he'd failed to provide. Ethan exhaled deeply, as though shedding part of the weight he'd carried for years. But there was one last thing he needed to say, something he knew would be his final request. Ethan.
Isaac, I need you to promise me something. Take care of Amara and Mason. Make sure they never suffer again.
Isaac tilted his head, his gaze unwavering, but his lips pressed together as he considered Ethan's words. Finally, he nodded, his voice no longer cold, but tinged with a faint trace of understanding. Isaac.
Ethan, I don't need you to remind me. Amara and Mason are everything to me. They already have a family, and I will protect it at all costs.
Ethan lowered his head, words failing him. He knew Isaac meant every word, and while it stung, it also gave him a strange sense of peace. As Isaac rose to leave, he looked at Ethan one last time. The coldness was gone from his expression, replaced by the understanding of a man who knew that everyone carries their own burdens. Isaac.
Ethan, regret doesn't change the past, but it can help you live better in the future. Do what's right, not for them, but for yourself.
Ethan remained seated, watching Isaac's figure disappear through the cafe doors. There was no reconciliation, but neither was there hatred. Ethan realized that his journey of redemption couldn't rely on the forgiveness of others. It had to begin with his own actions and choices moving forward. Ethan murmured to himself, his voice hoarse with emotion.
Thank you, Isaac, and I'm sorry.
He sat alone, the cafe's soft hum filling the silence as he stared into his untouched coffee. He wasn't forgiven, but for the first time he felt the faint stirrings of what it meant to start anew. The fashion stage in Paris, the city of light, glowed brilliantly under beams of spotlights and the powerful resonance of symphonic music. The room was packed with fashion enthusiasts from around the globe, all eyes fixated on the newest collection from Heritage by Amara. Amara emerged from backstage, radiant and confident. This collection wasn't just a masterpiece of artistic design, it was the story of her journey. It spoke of a woman who had risen above pain, injustice, and countless challenges to stand at the pinnacle of the international fashion world. Beside her was Isaac, the man who had stood by her through every high and low. His posture was steadfast, his gaze filled with pride as he looked at Amara. On her other side was Mason, now grown and exuding charisma. The lights of the runway reflected the confidence etched on his face as he walked alongside his parents. From a shadowed corner of the audience, Ethan watched the scene unfold. His eyes followed every step Amara, Isaac, and Mason took on the runway. They looked like the epitome of a perfect family, a complete picture in which he no longer belonged. Ethan took a deep breath, a mixture of bitterness and regret swirling in his chest. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel envy or resentment. Instead, he accepted that this was the result of his own mistakes. Ethan thinking to himself, they deserve this happiness, and I have no right to intrude. As the show concluded and applause erupted like thunder, Ethan remained seated. He didn't rise to celebrate or attempt to approach them for acknowledgement. Instead, he smiled a sad yet sincere smile. Ethan whispering to himself, I'm no longer a part of this story, but at least I haven't ruined it any further. For the first time, Ethan felt he was learning how to live with reality. He wasn't chasing forgiveness or seeking another chance to fix the past. Instead, he accepted that redemption wasn't about recognition, it was about quietly doing what was right, even when no one else would see.